After we announced my pregnancy, my SIL's plan to humiliate me at my husband's party backfired, landing her in jail and a divorce. Have you ever experienced that one person in your life who seems determined to turn every happy moment into chaos? In my case, that person was my sister-in-law, Kayla. What started as innocent sibling rivalry eventually evolved into a whirlwind of deception, manipulation, and outright cruelty. This is a story of how, despite Kayla's efforts to drive a wedge between me and my husband Harry, love, truth, and unity ultimately prevailed. From the beginning, Kayla seemed to be a person full of charm, but beneath her smile hid an intense desire to control her brother's life. It started subtly, with her trying to suggest who Harry should date before we met. But once Harry and I began falling in love, her intentions became clear. She wanted to shape his world to fit her vision of a perfect sister-in-law. Someone from her circle, someone she was comfortable with. This fixation only grew stronger as Harry and I became more serious. Kayla would often bring up Harry's exes during family dinners, praising them for their accomplishments, and reminiscing about their time with Harry in a way that made it obvious she was trying to get under my skin. It wasn't just awkward, it was painful. She was persistent, and no matter how often Harry told her to stop, she always found a way to make her opinions known, even going so far as to invite one of Harry's exes to a family gathering under the pretense of having bumped into her. She constantly observed my social media activities, always being the first to view my stories, and she'd report back to Harry with snide comments about what I posted. The day Harry proposed was a dream come true. His parents were thrilled, and our friends cheered us on. But Kayla's reaction stood out. Instead of celebrating with us, she sat silently before storming out of the gathering. Later that night, she called Harry, crying, saying she deserved to know about the engagement before anyone else. She also sent me a message that left me both shocked and unnerved. It wasn't just a warning, it was an assertion of her dominance in Harry's life. As if she were the one deciding whether I was worthy of marrying her brother. Wedding preparations only made things worse. Every decision I made, whether it was the color scheme, the flowers, or the venue, was met with criticism from Kayla. She would roll her eyes, make sarcastic comments, or even openly insult my choices. She went as far as to show up to my wedding wearing a black, floor-length gown and veil as if she were attending a funeral, telling everyone how she was mourning the loss of her brother to another woman. It was embarrassing, not just for me but for Harry and his parents. They had to ask her to leave after her behavior during the reception became disruptive. After Harry and I were married, we tried to distance ourselves from her drama. We wanted to focus on our new life, on building our future together. But Kayla had other plans. She made it clear that she was still very much involved in our lives, often visiting unannounced and complaining about her own hardships, her ex-friends, or her bosses. Her negativity was like a dark cloud that refused to leave. She also made snide remarks about my fitness routine, questioning why I went to the gym and accusing me of hiding something from Harry. She even went as far as to insinuate that our son Nate might not be Harry's child. The tipping point came when Harry and I announced my pregnancy at his birthday party. It was meant to be a joyous moment shared with family and friends. A new chapter for us as we prepared to welcome our second child. Everyone was overjoyed, except for Kayla. She turned away, clearly irritated, but then approached me with a smile, offering me a plate of food, as if trying to make amends for her past actions. I politely accepted it, but then noticed something that made my heart skip a beat: shrimp. I am severely allergic to shrimp, and Kayla knew this. It felt deliberate, as if she was testing me, trying to push me into a corner. What happened next was a blur. Kayla's husband, Jamie, accidentally took the plate meant for me and began eating. Within moments, he was gasping for breath. The party turned into chaos as we rushed to get help, and Jamie ended up being hospitalized. As we later reviewed the footage from the party, the truth became undeniable. Kayla had intentionally given me that plate, knowing it could harm me. Her actions not only hurt me but her own husband, leading to a chain of events that eventually landed her in legal trouble. Kayla was arrested after the incident, and during the investigation, she confessed to her jealousy towards me and her resentment over losing her brother's attention. She had wanted Harry to marry one of her friends, someone she could control, and had always seen me as an outsider. Her manipulation extended far beyond what any of us had imagined. She admitted that she had hoped to make a pregnancy announcement herself that day. And my news had pushed her over the edge. Jamie, now free from Kayla, became part of our extended family. Despite everything, he held no grudge against me for what had happened, understanding that he had been caught in the crossfire of Kayla's actions. It was heartbreaking to see someone who had been so loyal to her be betrayed like that. He confided in us, sharing how he had tried to support her through her difficult times. But her refusal to take responsibility for her actions eventually broke their marriage. The lessons I learned through this journey were invaluable. I realized that toxicity, no matter where it comes from, should never be tolerated or brushed aside. Kayla's attempts to control and manipulate came from her own insecurities, her own need to maintain power over her brother's life. The more she felt Harry slipping away, the harder she fought to keep her hold on him. But love is not about control, it's about trust, respect, and letting go. In the end, Harry and I stood united. Not because we fought back against Kayla, but because we chose to focus on each other. We chose to build a life that was free from the drama and negativity she tried to impose on us. Our family grew stronger, and our circle became filled with people who truly cared for us and wanted the best for us. Kayla's story is a reminder that jealousy and resentment can destroy not only relationships but also oneself. It is a cautionary tale about the dangers of letting envy dictate one's actions. To anyone out there dealing with a toxic family member or friend, remember this: you have the power to set boundaries. You have the right to protect your peace and happiness. And most importantly, you are not alone. Toxicity thrives in silence, in the spaces where we allow it to continue unchecked. But once we shine a light on it, once we stand up for ourselves, it loses its power. Kayla's journey is still ongoing. She is facing the consequences of her actions, and I genuinely hope she finds the help she needs to become a better person. As for us, we are moving forward, focusing on the future, and cherishing every moment with our growing family. Life is too short to be spent in the shadows of someone else's insecurities. It's meant to be lived in the light of love, laughter, and genuine connection. My wife kissed another man on a night out. I wasn't bothered, and now she's turning it into a major drama. When we find ourselves in a relationship, particularly one that's been nurtured over years, we often expect that the solid foundation we've built will weather the inevitable storms of life. But sometimes, what we thought was a sturdy structure turns out to have tiny cracks beneath the surface. And these cracks, left unchecked, can grow into significant fractures that threaten everything we've built. This is a story about love, growth, insecurity, and the struggle to bridge the gap between expectations and reality. It all started when I received a message in the early hours of a Sunday morning. My wife had gone out with some friends for a night of dancing and drinks, something she hadn't done in a long time. I stayed back, making sure our 2 kids were put to bed comfortably, and decided to unwind with some baking, one of the few passions that had stayed with me through our long marriage. But when I looked at my phone and saw the message from one of her friends, I felt a sense of dread. It wasn't anything like the cheating scandal headlines you might imagine, but it was enough to jolt me. The friend said something like, "Your wife kissed another guy tonight. She's feeling really guilty, and you should know about it." I looked at the timestamp and noticed that this message had been sent an hour ago. My first thought was a strange combination of calmness and disbelief. When my wife finally came home, she woke me up, crying and asking me if I would leave her because of what happened. She confessed that she had kissed another man and even danced with him. And it hadn't been just a single slip. They had kissed throughout the night. During almost every dance, as she spoke, her words stumbled over her guilt. She was clearly expecting a fierce reaction, but I wasn't feeling what she expected. I simply hugged her and told her it wasn't that big a deal to me. But that was the beginning of a long and complicated fallout. And as much as I wanted to forgive and forget, the aftermath of that night revealed far more about our relationship than I could have ever imagined. It was no longer about one mistake. It was about our entire marriage and how broken it had become. We had been together since we were 18. The love between us was simple at first, young, carefree, and full of the possibilities that life offers at such a young age. But with time, things change. Our intimacy had dwindled to almost nothing. Our love life after the first year became practically non-existent, dropping to maybe once or twice a year at best. It had been over 3 years since we'd been intimate when the kiss happened. And it wasn't because I wasn't trying or wasn't interested. It was her, and she wasn't wrong for it either. She expressed her discomfort with intimacy. But she also expressed an interest in keeping our marriage afloat. To me, intimacy had always been more than just physical affection, it was also a way of staying connected. Showing love in more ways than just words. Over time, her aversion made me question whether she even loved me in that way anymore. About 2 years ago, I decided I needed to take control of my own life. I was tired of feeling like a shadow of my former self. Tired of feeling unattractive. I was overweight, had been ever since I got sick years ago. And comfort eating had become a coping mechanism for me. I decided to lose the weight. Not for her or anyone else, but for myself. I dropped from nearly 300 pounds to about 200. I even started using weights. And for the first time in my life, I felt strong and fit, maybe even attractive. Interestingly enough, it seemed like this transformation was also changing how others perceived me. I got attention from other women, something I'd never experienced in our entire marriage. But these weren't things that tempted me away from my family or my wife. I loved her deeply and would never think of straying. Still, I couldn't help but notice a shift in her. She became insecure about my changes. Perhaps feeling that my improved health and self-confidence would make me want something, or someone, else. Ironically, I was doing it all to make my life better with her. To improve myself as a partner and a father. And that's where her guilt took root. After that night, my wife changed. It wasn't just the guilt, it was also resentment, fear, and projection. She accused me of not loving her enough, of not being hurt by what she had done. She told me that my lack of a dramatic response meant I must be cheating myself. She even accused me of being gay. It felt like nothing I said could calm her down. I tried to initiate conversations, but she wouldn't have it. We had tried couples counseling before. Many times. Every time, she'd accuse the therapists of taking my side, say they were bullying her, or that they made her out to be the bad guy. And I won't lie, it wasn't easy. The counselors often pointed out that she might be asexual, which she refused to consider. It was a label that threatened her idea of who she was. And that made her defensive. I reached out to her friends, trying to piece together what might be happening. I discovered that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. She had been sending flirtatious messages to one of her friend's boyfriends for years. Messages that were far more explicit than anything she'd ever expressed to me. And she had told her friends that I was under her thumb. That she could do whatever she wanted. And I wouldn't dare leave. That's when I knew it was time to make a decision, not for her, but for myself and our children. I decided to end our marriage. I loved her, but I could no longer bear to live a life where I was belittled, manipulated, and disrespected. The love we once shared had faded, and what was left wasn't healthy for either of us. We both deserved better, even if it meant going our separate ways. The divorce wasn't easy, particularly when it came to our children. They were caught in the middle of something they never asked for. And I wanted to make sure that they didn't feel unloved or abandoned. When she refused to see the children, I told them that Mom had canceled, at first because I didn't want them to feel the pain of rejection. But when it became clear that she was stepping back for good, I knew I had to tell them the truth, not all of it, but enough so they would understand it wasn't their fault. And throughout it all, I realized that sometimes the best way to show love is by letting go, by not forcing something that's broken to stay together just for the sake of appearances. Sometimes, in order to be the best parent, you need to be the best version of yourself first. I had been spending a lot of time with my children, baking, doing crafts, and trying to make a happy home for them. I also found solace in my hobbies, things I had put aside during our tumultuous relationship. Baking, which I loved so dearly, became an even more central part of my life. I baked with my kids on weekends, and we made it a special time. Our little family tradition. It was no longer about pleasing someone else. It was about creating memories with those I loved most. One particular Saturday, my son asked if we could bake his favorite cookies. As we worked together, his face lit up with pure joy. Flour covered the countertops, and the kitchen filled with laughter. It was a small moment, but it felt like a victory. For so long, our household had been a place of tension and resentment. Now, it was filled with warmth and love, and it reminded me of what mattered most. Through these experiences, I learned a few valuable lessons. Firstly, Love is not enough when respect is missing. No matter how deeply you care for someone, a relationship without mutual respect will eventually break down. Secondly, self-improvement should always come from within, from a genuine desire to be the best version of yourself. The changes I made weren't to gain attention or make someone else insecure, they were for me. And I realized that was the healthiest reason of all. Lastly, I learned that children can often understand more than we give them credit for. When I sat my kids down and told them what had happened, I expected heartbreak, but instead, they showed incredible resilience. They told me they were just happy that we were all together. And they wanted to continue making cookies every Saturday. It was their way of saying they were okay, that they understood I had done what was best for us. My journey since has not been easy, but it has been a journey of growth. The last 2 years have shown me what it means to let go of something toxic and embrace the unknown. It hasn't been without its challenges, moments where loneliness creeps in, or when I second-guess the decisions I made. But at the end of the day, I'm proud of myself for standing up for what I deserved, for the life my children and I deserved. So, to anyone out there who finds themselves questioning their worth, wondering whether they're enough because their partner makes them feel less than, remember that you are enough. You don't have to stay in a situation where you're not valued, respected, or loved. Sometimes the hardest decision is to walk away, but it can also be the most empowering one. You deserve a life filled with joy, laughter, and cookies with your kids on a Saturday morning, the small moments that remind you what love truly is. This story is not just about a kiss or a betrayal. It's about finding the strength to say, I deserve more. It's about recognizing the importance of respecting yourself enough to walk away from a love that is no longer serving you. And it's about realizing that sometimes the greatest love story you can have is the one you share with yourself and your children. At the end of the day, it's not the big dramatic moments that define our lives, it's the quiet mornings baking cookies, the laughter shared over spilled flour, and the love that endures through it all. And that is worth fighting for. An art teacher's nightmare. Uncovering the disturbing secrets behind a student's silent obsession. It was an ordinary Monday morning, the kind where everything felt comfortably predictable. At least at first. I walked into my classroom, a bright space filled with easels, paint splatters, and a sense of creativity that I loved fostering among my students. But little did I know, that morning would set in motion a terrifying chain of events that would completely upend my life. It would make me question my safety, my connection with my students, and my ability to continue doing what I love, teaching art. My name is Anna, an art teacher in a quiet Dutch town. My students were mostly young teenagers, and I considered myself fortunate to have a class that seemed, for the most part, curious, eager to learn, and filled with positive energy. Among my students was a girl named Jane, an intelligent 12-year-old who, from the very beginning, showed unusual attention towards me. Jane stood out not only because of her brilliance in art but also because of her strange behavior. Jane, as it turned out, had autism, and she often went out of her way to be helpful. She would do everything from defending me against her classmates' minor misbehaviors to insisting on helping me clean the classroom after everyone had left. For Valentine's Day, Jane had anonymously gifted me a rose. But I knew it was from her. I recognized her distinct handwriting on the card. Despite all this, I never truly worried. Sure, it was odd, but I chalked it up to her wanting a connection and being socially different. In my heart, I sympathized with her. Teenage years are difficult for everyone, let alone for someone dealing with the additional challenge of autism. But things took a chilling turn a few weeks later. It started as just another class where I split the students into groups for an art project. Jane and her usual group of 3 friends were being loud and distracting. So I separated them. I moved Jane to the opposite side of the classroom, and she seemed annoyed but compliant. I saw them conversing in what seemed like sign language, gestures, expressions, and quick signs flying back and forth. I didn't think much of it. Many teenagers seem to create secret languages. It's part of the experience of feeling unique. However, there was something about their body language that gave me pause. They kept glancing at me, and Jane, sitting alone, looked especially serious, signing rapidly. Something instinctive told me I should pay more attention. I have a personal history with sign language. My brother is deaf, so I grew up fluent in it. Up until then, I had never revealed this skill to my students. Curiosity got the better of me, and I focused on deciphering the signs from across the classroom. What I read in that series of signs made my heart drop. Jane was signing about finding out where I lived. She wanted to break into my house. She used gestures that left no room for doubt about her intentions. She spoke of hurting me and fantasized about what she would do to me once she got into my home. It was all there, clear as day, in front of me. My blood ran cold. I could hardly process the rest of the day. I watched Jane from a distance. A forced smile plastered on my face, hiding my fear and confusion. Every time she looked up at me, I felt my stomach twist. What had been innocent kindness from a student I had once considered sweet and quirky now felt like an iceberg, cold, unpredictable, and deeply dangerous beneath the surface. That day, I stayed late after school, pretending to do paperwork while I tried to calm my breathing. I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what. Reporting Jane would mean significant consequences for her, especially if her behavior stemmed from emotional issues related to her autism. And yet, I couldn't risk ignoring the possibility of real danger. Every scenario I imagined seemed wrong, terrifying, or impossible. I thought about all the times Jane had come into class with bruises. How she would talk about how much she hated her home. How she always tried to linger around after school to help me. The pieces began to click into place. I began to realize that perhaps this obsession wasn't born simply out of a desire for attention. Maybe this behavior stemmed from something deeper, something broken. I decided that I couldn't make this decision alone. I went to the administration and spoke with the school counselor. Jane's behavior, as I described it, horrified the counselor, and we agreed on a course of action. We would speak with Jane, but I would not do it alone. The counselor and Jane's mentor, let's call her Maya, would join me in trying to understand what exactly Jane was thinking. The next day, Jane walked into class as if nothing had happened. She was early as usual, offering to help me with preparations, her innocent smile now almost chilling. I declined and told her we needed to speak with Maya and the counselor. I saw her face twitch with confusion and a hint of fear. She didn't protest, but her usual bright demeanor dimmed. The meeting was one of the most difficult conversations I've ever had. Maya took the lead, as I could barely speak, my anxiety pressing down on me like a weight. As Maya asked Jane why she was doing these things, Jane broke down in tears. Between sobs, she started to unravel her story, how her parents never really cared for her, how they seemed to favor her younger siblings, and how she felt invisible at home. She confessed that the only time she ever felt seen was when she was around me. Jane admitted that her fascination with me had turned into something obsessive. She even explained that she didn't understand boundaries or what love truly meant. According to Jane, her friend Luca, who was older by a couple of years, had explained that stalking and fantasies of breaking into someone's home were all part of being in love. I was horrified. Jane truly believed that this was normal, that her twisted understanding of affection was acceptable. When Jane was eventually escorted out of the room, Maya looked at me sympathetically, but all I felt was numb. How had I missed all these signs? Jane was only a 12-year-old girl, and yet she had endured so much neglect and misinformation that she was led to this point. I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Was there something I could have done differently to prevent this? Later that evening, I sat in my apartment, staring at my front door, feeling an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. My once safe haven now felt exposed. I knew I had to take precautions, but I also knew that this situation went beyond just my own safety. Jane needed help, real help. I worried about what might happen to her if we simply expelled her or treated her as a criminal. The following days were a blur. The school administration got involved. Child services were called, and I was encouraged to take a short leave from work. The last thing I remember before stepping away from my role was seeing Jane in the hallway. She looked at me, her eyes wide and red from crying, and I saw nothing but a broken child, confused, frightened, and deeply in need of love and guidance. During my time away from school, I reflected on everything that had happened. It was then that I remembered a story I had once read about a young boy who acted out violently in school. He had been labeled as a troublemaker, and most teachers had given up on him. But one teacher took the time to really talk to him, to understand why he was angry. It turned out the boy's father was abusive, and the anger he displayed was merely a reflection of his pain. That teacher had changed the boy's life simply by seeing him, truly seeing him. I couldn't help but wonder if I could be that person for Jane. Despite my fear, despite everything that had happened, I knew that what Jane needed wasn't punishment, it was compassion. But the decision wasn't mine alone anymore, it was up to the professionals. The counselors, and her family. All I could do was hope that they would choose to help her rather than push her further away. This experience has left me with many sleepless nights, and I still don't know if I'll ever feel entirely safe again. But I do know one thing. Jane wasn't inherently evil or dangerous. She was a product of her environment, of neglect, of misinformation, and of a desperate need to be loved. And that, more than anything, broke my heart. This story is not just about fear and danger. It's also about understanding the impact we have on the lives of those we teach and mentor. Jane's story, as terrifying as it was, taught me that sometimes, behaviors that seem inexplicable or even threatening are rooted in pain, neglect, and a longing for connection. It taught me the importance of empathy, of looking beyond actions to see the underlying reasons, and of being there for someone even when it's difficult. If you are ever in a situation where someone's behavior seems alarming, remember that there is often more beneath the surface. Address it with care, seek help, and don't try to carry the burden alone. Sometimes, the most troubled individuals are the ones who need our compassion the most. And for anyone who might be struggling as Jane was, feeling invisible, unloved, or misunderstood, know that your feelings are valid. But there is a better way to seek love and connection. Talk to someone, reach out for help, and know that you are not alone. This story is a stark reminder of the complex, often hidden, struggles that people, especially young students, may be going through. It's a reminder to approach each day with empathy, to see beyond what's visible, and to be the person who cares when no one else does.